Let's go straight to Brussels now and listen out for the NATO Secretary General.
Just met to address Russia's continued military build-up in and around Ukraine. This was a substantive discussion on the most serious security crisis in Europe in decades. Allies welcome all diplomatic efforts, and there are signs from Moscow that diplomacy could continue. But so far, we do not see any sign of de-escalation on the ground. No withdrawals of troops or equipment. This may, of course, change. However, what we see today is that Russia maintains a massive invasion force ready to attack, with high-end capabilities from Crimea to Belarus. This is the biggest concentration of forces in Europe since the Cold War. From the start, NATO allies have made clear that further Russian aggression against Ukraine would have a high cost. And we have called out Russia's actions, plans and disinformation. At the same time, NATO remains prepared for dialogue. It is not too late for Russia to step back from the brink of conflict and choose the path of peace. NATO has sent concrete written proposals to Russia on transparency, risk reduction and arms control. We have yet to receive a response. I reiterate my invitation to Russia to meet again in the NATO-Russia Council. NATO will not compromise on core principles. The right of each nation to choose its own path and our ability to protect and defend all allies. We have already enhanced our deterrence and defense with more troops, planes and ships and high readiness of the NATO response force. These steps are defensive. NATO is not a threat to Russia. We do not know what will happen in Ukraine, but the situation has already demonstrated we face a crisis in European security. Moscow has made it clear that it is prepared to contest the fundamental principles that have underpinned our security for decades, and to do so by using force. I regret to say that this is the new normal in Europe. Therefore, today, ministers decided to develop options for further strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense, including to consider establishing new NATO battle groups in Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe. And I welcomed the offer by France to lead such a battle group in Romania. Our military commanders will now work on the details and report back within weeks. Earlier today, we also held a regular meeting of the Nuclear Planning Group. Ministers considered worrying developments across the globe, including Russia's and China's modernization of their nuclear arsenals and the continued risk of nuclear proliferation. Allies consulted on how to keep our nuclear deterrence safe, secure and effective, so NATO's deterrence and defense remains strong. Ministers also welcomed the progress made on burden sharing, with the 7th consecutive year of increased defense spending by European allies and Canada. This means $270 billion in additional spending on defense since 2014. And we welcome that the large majority of allies are now allocating at least 20% of the defense investment to major equipment, research and development. This evening, we will discuss NATO's next strategic concept. I'm confident that when leaders meet in Madrid in June, they will reaffirm that Europe and North America must continue to stand strong together in NATO. Because NATO is the unique, essential and indispensable transatlantic forum for our defense and security. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
We'll start with BBC here. Thank you very much, Secretary General. Jonathan Beale, BBC. You talked about new battle groups. Are those going to happen regardless of what Russia does? And can you give us a time frame of when we might see forces sent to Romania, Bulgaria, elsewhere? And then also, I think you just said, I regret to say this is the new norm. What is the new norm for European security? You say it's in crisis. You're essentially saying it's going to be in crisis for a long time.
Well, the new normal is that Russia has demonstrated that it really is willing to contest some of the fundamental principles for our security. The right for every nation to choose its own path, and also, of course, the right for NATO allies to defend and protect each other. They actually suggested a legally binding treaty violating those principles. And they have used force, the biggest concentration of combat force since the end of the Cold War, to underpin and to try to intimidate other countries in Europe to in a way respect or to accept the Russian demands. So this is a new normal, which is violating core principles, which has been important for the security and the stability of Europe for decades. And therefore I regret to say that we don't know what will happen, but we know what has already happened. And that is that Russia has demonstrated a will to use force to try to coerce other countries and to try to change some fundamental principles that are important for our shared security. And that's the reason why we need to also consider more longer-term adjustments of NATO's posture in the East. I will not preempt any final decision. We have asked our military commanders to provide advice and provide more details on the scale and the scope, including of potential new battle groups in the East, in the Southeast, in Romania and the Black Sea region, and also other potential adjustments of our more longer-term presence in the East.